First of all, before I start the story, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Toucan the Rapper for allowing me to narrate his stories. I love them so much. If you didn't know this, he has a book. Check it out. It's on Amazon. I'll put the link in the description. And now, on to the story. Don't keep scrolling because of the silly title. If you got a better name for the thing that ate my date an hour ago, I'd love to hear it. Mainly because it means you might know how to kill it. This would be useful information because the damn thing followed me home. As I said, it's a butt vampire. I literally cannot think of any other name for it. It stopped Benji and I when we were walking back from the restaurant. In case you were wondering, Italian and delicious. It was our third date, which meant, you know what? I was excited. It had been 7 months since I last had, you know what? I needed it. It's still been 7 months, except now I'm covered in Benji's bodily fluids. Not the good kind of bodily fluids I wanted to be covered in tonight either. We were walking together hand in hand. He was failing at telling jokes. I was pretending to laugh at them. It was late. The street was empty. That's what made it so easy to hear the tinkling. Hold on a second, Clara. Do you hear that? Is that wind chimes? It was wind chimes. They were coming from down a side alley up ahead, the kind of pokey space between two buildings you definitely don't want to walk down alone at night or during the day. But that's mainly because the piss smell was so bad my nose was wrinkling even from a good 10 feet away. It definitely wasn't the kind of alley you heard wind chimes coming from. Nothing good comes from alleys like that, even if the low tinkling was soothing in a honey trap kind of way. I tugged on Benji's hand, but I don't think he was as resistant to it as me. I'll never know because we'd only been listening to it for about 10 seconds when the mime stepped out of the alley. You can imagine a stereotypical street mime here, the French type from cartoons, because that's exactly how the heavy-set smiling man was dressed. Well, almost exactly. He was wearing large, square sunglasses in addition to the ensemble. They didn't clash as much with the beret as you'd think. My grip on Benji's hand went crack-knuckle tight the instant the black and white stripes bounded from the alleyway. Benji, let's go. It's late. Well, hold on a minute. It's street art. At 11:30 at night? In Wisconsin? Yeah. Do you know what kind of street art happens in weird places late at night? The cool kind. For a smart guy, Benji was dumb at a moment when dumb was stupid and stupid meant deadly. It wasn't the cool kind of street art. I knew that straight away mainly because the wind chime tinkling followed the mime out of the shadows, even though he wasn't holding any fucking wind chimes. Benji. Shh. At the time, I was angry. I let go of his hand, slapping his arm. My brow suddenly furrowed. A snap decision was made that there would be no you-know-what that night, although apparently not just by me. I think the mime knew it had Benji in its trance. It turned its smiling face towards me briefly, shrugged, then focused its attention on my date. It danced the strangest dance I've ever seen. Even I was entranced by this point. My feet found roots in the cracked pavement holding me in place as the black and white stripes weaved and gyrated in Benji's direction. The world seemed to slow around it. Sounds elongated and warped, the distant traffic noise stretching and deepening, retreating further to the edge of my hearing. The color drained from everything except the mime. Even though he himself was monotone, my brain started to register all the colors possible in those horizontal stripes on his shirt. My eyes still reported the same monochromatic aesthetic, but my emotions fluttered as though I was face to face with a rainbow. Pretty. I heard the words leave my lips like I was 7 again and had just discovered a pearl at the beach. Benji was gawping at the mime, slack-jawed and a trickle of drool running from the corner of his mouth. Then without warning, the mime stopped wriggling. It was about 3 feet away when it halted and turned in one fluid movement. Before I could clearly make sense of what was happening, the mime dropped his trousers. The spell was broken instantly for me at least. Colors returned to their proper place. Sounds remembered how they should assemble themselves in my ears. I screamed. There, on the mime's pale ass cheeks, were a pair of red glaring eyes. They blinked and rolled in their sockets, which were exactly as you were imagining, on the mime's butt. You're laughing right now, aren't you? I'm not going to tell you to go fuck yourself for that, even though you're going to feel real bad about it when you find out what happened to Benji. But yeah, initially I did find it a little funny too. It's a funny mental image. After the shock wore off, I even let out a nervous little laugh. Emphasis on little. Benji didn't though. Benji was still drooling. I screamed for real when the mime bent over forwards. It wasn't funny anymore then. There was a wet plop when his palms hit the pavement, but his butt head reared up. The mime stretching his knees and standing on tippy toes until the anger-filled red-ass eyes were level with Benji's navel. I grabbed Benji's hand again, tried pulling him away, tried running again myself, but it was no good. My legs didn't answer to me anymore, and it was clear Benji wasn't going to answer to anyone. Benji, we have to run. I screamed again when the mime looked over his shoulder and snarled at me. Calme-toi, salope. Le directeur nous entendra. His words were as thin, taunting, and French as his face. So terrified was I that without thinking or even understanding, I obeyed the mime's command. My hand slapped itself to my mouth. Fat blobs of salt water cascaded from my eyes, rolling over my trembling fingers and falling with dull splats on the asphalt pulling next to my date's saliva. Benji's vacant eyes were still fixed on those furious eyes on the mime's gluteus maximus, drool still slithering from the corner of his mouth. He was smiling. Funny man. My date was swaying back and forth ever so slightly. His clammy palm didn't react to mine trying to grab and pull it. That's why, when those ass cheeks clapped themselves apart, he didn't react. I did. My feet were still glued to paving slabs, so I didn't fall so much as bend over backwards at the knees. I was screaming for a third time, although now I was far too horrified by the mime's rear to pay any attention to the French expletive snarling from his face. Something shot out from between those cheeks. Something long, wet, and organic. Something that looked almost like a length of a lower intestine, if lower intestines were lined with thousands of needled teeth. The spell on Benji was broken the moment it latched onto his belly. Unfortunately, by then, it was far too late. Ouch! Clara, what the oh my god! He was screaming by the time the sphincterous tube began pulsing and heaving. I could tell Benji's feet were just as rooted as mine. He didn't fall when he passed out, but curled in on himself, a shivering man mushroom hunched down before those glaring red eyes. Slipping into unconsciousness meant his screaming stopped pretty quickly. Mine didn't. I was screaming throughout the long minutes the toothy intestinal trunk sucked and squeezed at Benji's navel. The high-pitched shrieks were uninterrupted for every second of Benji getting smaller and smaller, continuous and unabating as I watched the mime's belly swell and stretch. Buttons pinged off his stretching shirt. Oh, c'est bien, t'as mon femme. Trop longtemps sans nourriture. The mime's French rambling took on nauseating undertones as Benji deflated. The kind of heavy breathlessness I'd planned to be panting with myself before my romantic evening turned into a horrific nightmare. I watched, unable to stop it, as lumps of Benji moved down the long tube, squeezed and squelched along, the bumps marching along its length like unattended infants in the belly of an anaconda. My screaming had devolved into saw-peppered panic gibberish by the time the mime was finished. There was a final loud slurp, a prolonged low wet noise that echoed down the street of empty car showrooms and closed stores. With one movement, the mime's trunk sucked up Benji's empty skin, swallowing the last remnants of my date up into the mime's bowels. I was still babbling in tongues when the mime pulled up his pants. It didn't stop when he sat down on the sidewalk opposite of me, patting his distended, swollen belly. Désolé, je ne joue pas normalement avec la nourriture. D'habitude, je m'attendrais que tu sois saoul. Mais c'est celui de Unfiltered mais affamé, pardonne-moi. Je ne peux pas me permettre d'être sélectif. Then, the mime did something horrifying. He smiled at me. It was then I realized the other inconsistency. His teeth weren't teeth. They were nubs of hardened sinew on a muscular membrane, one that stretched between his lips, folding out of sight when his jaw wasn't open. But if he had no throat, how was he? My question was answered when he removed his sunglasses. I didn't have screams left in me anymore. That's why I could hear the wet grinding from his belly, a soft whirring just like a blender if you made a blender out of bones and wrapped it in rotting flesh. What made me retch wasn't the sound though. It was what lay behind the glasses. Because, you see, the mime didn't have eyes in the sockets of his face. He had mouths. Two small anus-sized mouths, complete with eyelid-thin lips and baby-small teeth. The mime belched in a horrific smell of burning hair wafted up from the twin ocular throats. Then, without warning, he vomited. It started at his neck. The last time I had you-know-what was with Dean Harworst. Dean was into British nature documentaries, and once we'd watched one on bullfrogs. You ever seen a bullfrog stretch out its throat to intimidate predators? Imagine that, but on a French street mime. The bleached skin of his thick neck ballooned, newly acquired potbelly shrinking with more jaw-clenching wet squelches as his head inflated. As for the mime's jaw, it simply bent to accommodate the swelling neck and lower face. It flexed itself to make room with an elasticity no bone should possess. The membrane between lips was fully visible. The cartilage pseudo-teeth spread further and further apart. Beneath the thin skin, I could see a yellowish-white liquid churning, filling the empty cavity between the mime's displaced ears. I had just enough time to register all that when he heaved. The eye mouths opened. Twin torrents of pus-colored liquid gushed from the lips on either side of his nose. The flood was hot. Steam cascaded from it. The splashes that lapped across my screaming form burned like fresh coffee. The hurling continued for a full minute, the bullfrog neck slowly returning to normal proportions as the mime doused me in the bloodless, liquidized remains of Benji. The purging part of this horrifying bulimic feeding must have broken the spell on my feet because I found that I was running down the road. He was banging on the windows of my car while I was fumbling for the keys, screaming at me in French from alternating eye mouths. I reversed over him, but it did no good. So distracted was I by the sight of him running after my beat-up Ford Escort faster than any man should that I almost crashed into a tree. But of course, the mime isn't a man, is he? He's a butt vampire. What else would you call it? It hypnotizes as a vampire would. It's pale and pasty like a vampire is. It killed Benji by draining all his blood, which is what vampires are stereotypically known for. The fact that it has a backward digestive system and mouths for fucking eyes is irrelevant. Facts are facts. It ticks the vampire boxes. That's why I've barricaded myself inside my apartment, The damn thing followed me home. I knew I shouldn't have moved so close to downtown. I could walk the distance in less than half an hour. I had barely 5 minutes to drag the refrigerator in front of the door before I heard shrill French expletives coming from the parking lot outside. That's the thing, you see. I live in one of those units where there are no inside hallways. Every front door opens to the outside world. If the butt vampire is indeed a vampire and not a butt something much worse, I'll be safe when the sun rises. If not then, well, I'm fucked, aren't I? That's why I'm posting this. If you've come across the butt vampire before, and it's not a vampire, please let me know. I've been sharpening a stake on the off chance it's one of those vampires that sunlight only slows down but doesn't kill. I just thank God I live in the kind of neighborhood where the crime is bad enough for barred windows and the doors don't fuck about. So yeah, a butt vampire ate my date. It's outside my apartment right now, shrieking at me to open up. It'll be dawn in an hour, and if it's not gone by then, I'm going to have to deal with it. Anyone got some good tips on how?